This is Ratish Nair. Welcome back to my channel. As wildlife photographers, we always have very little control on the direction of light, right? There are situations where we are forced to shoot against light. And how do you deal with those situations, right? So the image that is in front of you is an ideal example of what happens when your subject walks in between you and the source of light, right? You can do whatever you do with your camera. Obviously choose the right metering mode, overexpose for the subject, or underexpose depending on the situations that you are in. But you will always, more often than not, land up in situations where your subject is darker than the background, or the background is much brighter than the subject. How do you process these images? How do you kind of ensure that you recover the details from your subject and you still have a good image with you? That is something that we will learn in this video. Always remember, before we get into the video, always remember that it is easier for you to recover details from a slightly underexposed subject than an overexposed subject, right? With that, let's get started. The first few things that I will do here, one obviously is a habit. I will always do lens correction here, remove chromatic aberrations if any, enable profile corrections. This will match to my lens profile. You know that I used the Nikkor 400 2.8T CVRS on my Nikon Z9, and these were the settings that I shot this on. 1/800, f-stop of 4.5 on a 2.8 glass, 400 mm, and my ISO was about 110, which gives you an indication that I had a lot of light to play with. All of you know that I shoot manual plus auto ISO, and therefore I have direct control on my shutter speed and aperture, and the camera sets my ISO. Right now, there's a debate huge debate whether that's the right way to shoot or not. But I guess that's for another video or another day. But for today, what's important is to understand how do we process an image such as this to make it look good, right? Third is I may want to use this on Instagram, and therefore since this is a portrait orientation, I would want to kind of crop this for Instagram, which is a 4:5 or a 8:10 aspect ratio. Now once I've done this, I will recompose it, and that's it. This is how it looks like, a portrait of a tiger crossing the road against bright background. Now this is something that we have to work with, right? The third step is to correct the color profile of the image. So every time you import an image into Lightroom by default will change the color profile of your image to Adobe Color. Now that is not something that we would want to, because you would have set certain color profiles in your camera and you would want to actually see what you've shot, right? Therefore, what I will do is I've shot this on camera standard, and therefore I'll select camera standard from the drop down. If you do not see camera standard on the drop down, do not worry, or your color profile on the drop down, do not worry, do not panic. You can go to these 4 boxes here, click on this, and you will get multiple color profiles here, right? So you'll get Adobe Raw, camera matching, artistic, black and white, modern, vintage, etc. Because we want to arrive at our camera matching profile, we will open the camera matching drop down, and here the nomenclatures may match your color profile within your camera depending on the brands that you're using. Now these are the nomenclatures largely used in the Nikon parlance, and therefore it shows me flat, landscape, neutral, portrait, standard, etc. Right? I click on standard because this is what I generally shoot on, and I'm sure you'll observe whenever I hover around, there's a little star icon that comes on top of the thumbnail, right? Click on the star icon on your thumbnail and close this. So next time you are editing an image, once you open this drop down, you will find your camera matching color profile already here, right? So camera standard it is. I've selected that, the colors are matching. Now I need to ensure that my white balance is corrected. Again, a very deep subject, but you all know my method. I always use the white balance selector here. I hover this around color tones that are neutral in nature, whether it is white, whether it is gray. I think that's something that I always look for, right? And while I hover around, you can also see in the navigator panel that you will see the tones changing. This is also an indication of what you want to arrive at, right? So that's something that I'm doing. Sometimes it's relatively easy, and there are times when this becomes really a pain to find the right color which can match your image or the way you want the image to look at. Or ideally, in my method of doing it, I want the actual colors to be visible, right? So we will look for the actual colors till we get them. Right, let's keep hovering, and while I'm hovering, I am trying to get the RGB values as close to each other. You may choose to ignore the decimal values, it's absolutely fine. You're not, so for example, you see on the screen 29, 29, 30. It'll be very extremely rare for you to find 30, 30, 30 or 29, 29, 29. Therefore, get those values as close to each other, and then you can always process to get those right. So I think I have found mine. Just double click on your tint to reset it to the actual values. You don't want your tint to be, greenish or more magenta in nature. Okay, so I reset this to whatever my camera had set for. Right, now this looks okay for me, and now we will start processing this image. If you look at the histogram here, you already see that the image is slightly on the darker side. Now you may say, Ratish, this image is blown out in the background. So why is the histogram showing the image is darker? It is because majority of the image has your subject. So your subject has covered 80% of your frame, and then you have this 5% in the background which is darker, and that's what is getting calculated here. So it's important to understand that before you start processing. We're not going to touch the exposure here, primarily because if I try to overexpose for the subject, my background gets blown out, which is not what I want to do. The subject is looking great, but the background is totally blown out, right? You all know that I generally do not like to play with the contrast slider, so we will not touch that. We will basically only work with the highlight, shadows, whites and blacks for this particular image. How do you do that? Fairly simple, right? Hold down your shift key, double click on your highlights, and you already see that your highlights has come down a bit. There, I am still not okay with certain areas, but I think that we will touch in the local processing or the masking that we do for the image. We repeat the same step. Hold down your shift key, double click your shadows, and that opens up the shadows for your subject as well. Now you can see that all the details of your subject are clearly visible. It's a tack sharp image. I can see the fur details very clearly, the iris details here, the whiskers are very clear to me, right? Therefore it tells me that the image is shot well and I'm not lost details here, right? Now come to the whites and the blacks here. Now how do we do that? You basically hold down your Alt or Option depending upon Windows or Mac, whatever systems that you're using. Hold down your Alt or Option and drag your white slider to the positive values to the right of the slider, and stop right when you start seeing these clippings, right? What do these clippings indicate? Clippings indicate that you're burning out details in these areas, right? Come back. Yeah, now we're not seeing any clippings. We stop right there. Same with the blacks. Hold down your Alt or Option key. This time we'll do the opposite. We'll drag blacks to the negative values. Now when you come to negative, you see that the image, because it is darker, you see that it is already starting to clip. So we come back to about -4 here for this image, and we stop right there. Now you see the image is slightly more acceptable to me because the balance between the background and the subject is somewhat established. We will continue to process this till we get to the ideal appealing value, but for me right now this looks okay. So I stop here. There's nothing much to be done I generally don't touch this panel unless and until I'm shooting a misty image. Vibrance is okay, but saturation is something that is a clear no-go from my end. I do not recommend using saturation at all, because when you use the saturation slider, it saturates for the entire image. Every pixel in this image gets saturated. While you use vibrance, it only saturates the muted colors in the image. But in this image, we don't have to deal with it. Nothing much to be done. The only panel that we will touch upon is the details, but that's for the later stage. If we decide to do, I don't think that's required because the image is fairly sharp. There's no noise at all. Shot at 110 ISO, therefore no question of noise. Now come back to masking. What do we want to treat here? We want to first ensure that the background is, properly exposed. It's not too overexposed. It's not too underexposed. Therefore, we first select the background for this image. The AI does a fabulous job. It's kind of selected the background perfectly. However, there are certain areas where it is overdone, like the paw here. So I deselect this, and this area between the tail is not. So therefore we will add. You saw last time when I wanted to remove something, I used the subtract value. Now I'm using the add value here, taking the brush and just brushing inside. You don't have to be precise because the surrounding areas are darker anyway. So I will just select that area and then come back to your mask 1. You can always rename this mask. Let's do that. Right, so rename, we will call this as the background. Okay, and for background, under presets, we'll use the presets here, much easier. I'll go down till we find burn or darken. Because the background is blown out or brighter than the subject, we want to darken it or burn it out. So we'll select burn and maybe just tone down the highlights a bit again. Right, now your highlights are looking better. It is far more balanced. This is how I would have wanted to probably get my image in the camera. And now we will look at working on the subject. Now how do you kind of select the subject? You can always go and say select subject, but because we already made changes to the background layer, I would recommend that we duplicate an invert mask so that the entire background layer comes with the selections that we've done. Right, now here let's rename this to subject. Right, now I come to subject mask preset. We will say okay, lighten the subject for me. Okay, and it has already lightened the subject for you. Now your subject and your background are fairly balanced. Right, now you can decide if you want to override some of these. You want to bring down the highlights or increase the highlights, maybe increase the whites a bit, or maybe change the temperature of the subject, whatever. Depending on your taste, you can do that. I would leave it at this and then come back to my overall processing. I think the overall image looks slightly more warmer, so I will take it down to something at this value and then try and increase the exposure here. Right, now if I look at this image, this is how it looks like. Now let's quickly look at the before and after. Right, so this was the before. Right, so the subject was fairly darker, background was much more brighter, but this is what we turned it out to be. Right, so this to me now is an image that is well recovered. Obviously you can do a lot more things to this and kind of work on this till you kind of refine further to each one's taste, but this is generally how you basically recover details on your underexposed subject or your backlit images. Hope this video was helpful. If you like this video, do like this and share it with all your friends. Please subscribe to the channel. That will always help me go forward. Thank you so much.